Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So this week, we have a special guest on the show, and I'll introduce you in a very, roundabout way. So if you've been a longtime listener or watcher of Personality Hackers podcast, we've had our good friend, who has INFP preferences. His name is Dan. He's come on to the show multiple times to talk about all his adventuring around the world. He's hiked the Triple Crown, so he's done a lot of hikes here in the United States. Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, and the
Continental Divide
Trail, yes. And he's an adventurer. He comes and talks about INFP things and all his INFP adventures. This week, we thought we'd invite you onto the show. This is our good friend, former student good friend, Will. INTP preferences. Talk a little bit about INTP adventuring. Now, this may not be out on a nature trail in the woods. INTP adventures are a little bit different, but well, welcome to Personality Hacker.
Nice to be on. My version of adventuring is I have all types of adventures in front of my computer in my room. I guess my version of adventuring has been more around consistently pivoting due to boredom into building up a set of competencies where, I went into becoming a software engineer, and then I kind of got bored with that, and I went into video editing and music production, and then into running startup and getting into like education, and then getting into like AI and blockchain, and basically every type of nerdy interest you can pretty much imagine. I'm just really, really fascinated by building up a wide plethora of skill sets and then containing them all in one person. It's like an obsession of mine almost. And so, of course, that has actually included a large amount of actual adventuring because I did need to, step into my exploration phase and all that kind of stuff. But I do find myself able to explore in the intellectual realm insofar as that is a process of building new skill sets that I can rely upon.
Now, if you're watching on YouTube right now, you're jacked, Will. Like you're extremely, like you clearly go to the gym, you work out. You've not only built competency in maybe mental places, but also physical capacity. And so if you're just listening to us, go watch this on YouTube. You'll see how big Will is. You're jacked with lots of muscles. So just talk a little about your experience before we get into some of the details of what we're going to talk about today, which is artificial intelligence, AI. I just want to hear a little about your experiences in an INTP who has put emphasis on your physicality and also your mentality. And my guess is, and we've talked offline, so I already know the answer, but I'm teeing you up. I'm guessing it kind of causes a little bit of challenge for you because you probably don't really fit in any particular, it probably amplifies the challenge that you already have as an INTP, weirdly enough. You'd think it would make it easier for you, but sometimes I bet it makes it harder.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is that everybody's like, oh, well, that guy's obviously not an INTP, in the type space. But as far as how it actually came about and why I got into fitness and all that kind of stuff is that as a part of, the building skill sets and all this kind of stuff, it leans into I just kind of want to optimize everything. And it made sense to have some relationship with fitness and becoming really, really fit, because the more fit you are, the more capable you are just fundamentally, and you can think more clearly, you have more energy, and all those things made sense to me. I didn't have necessarily a natural proclivity towards, doing physical stuff, but it just made the most amount of sense to get fit because, when I was a teenager, I was incredibly awkward and couldn't really talk to anybody, but I could go and work out by myself alone, and then suddenly people kind of liked me a little bit more. I kind of got the foot in the door in the social avenues and things like that. So that was helpful for that. And I have come to learn that I have benefited a lot from being able to have a 10-year-old introverted sensing, insofar as it really allows you to habituate really useful things. And so fitness for me now is like, it's just a thing that I do, like it's almost like I couldn't not do fitness. And so my introverted thinking is kind of obsessed with the actual optimization of health and fitness. And it just happened to be an interest of mine as a teenager. And it was kind of like, well, can I be even healthier? Can I be even stronger? Can I be even better? And so there was a little bit of the intellectual interest in what could be done. And then I just did it enough whereby it became a habit, and then I just keep doing it and keep doing it. And so it's kind of interesting. Like it sort of looks like an obsession almost, but I don't even really think about it that much anymore. It's just what I do. And so it's kind of like I joked with Antonia about this. I benefit from passive jackness in the same way that, like economically you can have passive income, that kind of thing. And so to be honest, it's something that I really wish I could convince more people to get into, because I'm not really naturally wired to get into fitness and whatnot, but it has been unbelievable in terms of the doors it opens. Like every human, we all have these very shallow perceptions of what value is and all that kind of stuff. So the way that you look or how fit you are, regardless of somebody's economic status or whatever, I always get, dude, how do you get those biceps? Across all strata of everything, right? Mm-hmm. And so it kind of like it makes things easier in that fashion. Now, to the second part of what you were saying, though, in terms of what it makes it difficult to do, it makes it really difficult to get close to people or become a part of a group. Because a lot of the times, like, I think like the nerds, but then when I go and want to hang out with the nerds, they're like, you don't like, but you're not really one of us, like you don't look like one of us. And then if I go and hang out with the jocks, they're like, why are you so weird? Like, why are we talking about AI when we could be doing fun stuff, Yeah. And so it's unfortunately played into the, you did team me up on this, the loneliness that INTPs are going to feel just, by being weirdos anyway.
Yeah.
And it really kind of doubles down on that because it is very difficult to find people who kind of just like and accept me for who I am. And I might be projecting my own proclivities onto that as well. But it's definitely made it easier to be lonely. That's for sure.
Yeah. Which is already a challenge as an INTP.
Yeah, for sure.
So the thing you use to solve it is also in some ways also a little isolating. But at the same time, it doesn't sound like you would make different choices because there's also a lot of benefits that come with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I would love to be able to connect with people more and whatnot, but my orientation is definitely towards optimization though. And I can't deny it is better to be fit. It just is. It just feels awesome. And there's so many downstream effects, and I don't want to turn this into a fitness podcast. So I won't double down on it too hard or anything like that. But I can't let myself be swayed by the difficulties that it might present, because the benefits in terms of it just makes the most amount of sense to be fit. It's just so overwhelmingly leaning in that direction. I think in the zeitgeist right now, I'm getting the sense that people are actually pushing against that concept and message. Like there's things like fat acceptance, and there's other movements where people are trying to indicate that almost like having that perspective is playing into a more shallow way of thinking and interacting as people. And so I can almost experience somebody watching this being like, well, that's not healthy, right? That's not a good way of looking at it, because now you're pushing for this idea of almost like being obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. And considering that's becoming more and more a part of social conditioning, you still find like there's just endless benefits to, and you're not even saying taking care of your health. I think that's the diplomatic way that people say it. It's like, well, it's just taking care of your health. But you're like saying specifically, no, like being jacked, looking a certain way, that itself has benefits. Yeah, and I mean, so there's gradations to everything, right? It's not the binary, either you have no relationship to fitness or you're jacked or something like that. There's benefits, and they basically just kind of go up to a certain point, and then if obsession is the driver of your interest in fitness, then it can tip over into the negative, because I mean, just like any obsession can tip over into the negative, regardless of how positive it might be outside of it being an obsession. And so I don't think that people should go and, if you're not naturally driven towards doing optimization for its own sake, because that's just inherently satisfying for you. You don't need to be as jacked as I am. It sounds so terrible to say. You don't need to be as jacked as I am. That's my thing. I just happen to have an interest in it, so that's fine. But I would strongly say that people could benefit more from fitness and health. Yes, that's the diplomatic way. And I don't think anybody's going to contest that. But also the looks thing, like people are just more shallow than they want to admit to themselves. Yeah. And but it's hard though to take the effort, control your diet, like all the necessary components to look as optimal as you could. And so, the easier thing to do is just say like, well, everybody else needs to change their perception of things because I don't really feel good about not feeling good about my current state. And one of the things that it helps with, like, that having introverted thinking as my dominant function does for me is that I have that critical voice in my head, but it never feels denigrating, right? It's like it sees the lack of optimization in certain elements of myself, and I'm like, you could get better at this, you could get better at this, you're not that great at this, et cetera, et cetera. And I never feel bad about it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. Maybe I should focus on that. I don't feel like it right now. Okay, well, I'll focus on it later. That kind of thing. It's almost like just a very neutral dialogue in my head.
Yeah.
And so that's the perspective that I'm coming at this with. And I've lived in a state where I don't have as much muscle, fitness, whatever it is, and I've lived in a state where I do. And even outside of being somebody who has a really strong attachment to their feelings and whatnot, I feel so much better. Like there's just a part of the way that people look at you, the way that you gain instantaneous respect, which is kind of silly. I mean, unfortunately, you also gain instantaneous, what would be like
Competition?
There's competition and people making snap judgments about you, but you can quickly dispel those negative appraisals by just being a kind, thoughtful person in front of the person. They're like, oh, okay, you seem like a pretty cool person. It's just, I cannot stress the benefits of being fit enough. And again, I feel like we're derailing this a little bit.
We are. I'm going to switch gears here.
Well, and I do want to, because I just know my introverted thinking and extroverted feeling just knows that somebody's going to be really triggered and they're going to take it out on you in a comment. They're going to be like, that guy's a jerk, or he's not representing it well. And I just want to make a little comment that whenever I'm around somebody else who also uses the function of introverted thinking, it's such a relief to me. There is so much tiptoeing, I think, that people have to do in order to not, to not be offensive, or to make sure that nobody's feelings are hurt. And maybe it's because I have introverted thinking, what John Beebe would call a parent position or parent function. But there's something to be said for hearing something that is true and it stinging a little bit. Right. And that doesn't mean it has to crush or be demoralizing. If it's crushing or demoralizing, it's very hard to get to the other side of that. But something that's, that's like, no, my experience is that when I wasn't jacked, the world treated me worse. And when I was, it treated me better. That's a truth. Or most people can benefit from paying a little bit more attention to, to their fitness specifically, not just their health, but specifically like the fitness aspect of it. Because, that brings into it your physical movement, that brings into it nutrients, and that sort of thing. And so I actually appreciate the fact that you're probably going to take some arrows for saying what you're saying, right? And it's a relief to me to hear people, say things that are true, and somebody's going to get offended, and it's okay, because on the other side of that, if they can contend with it and go, well, why am I getting offended by that? Like, what is it helping me reflect about myself that is maybe an area that I can attend to? Then it's actually done its job, right? And that's what truth is supposed to do.
And I mean, my baby extroverted feeling does want to go and say, listen, guys, I'm just saying this because I want you to have that good feeling too. Like,
right.
But at the same time, you are not less valuable if you don't value fitness or anything like that, right? Like your value is defined by, I can't define that in a sentence or anything like that, right? But it's just, hey, I've found this thing that's really, really, really high leverage in terms of like the time is going to go by in a day, regardless of what you do in that day.
Yeah.
And an unbelievably high leverage thing you could do is spend an hour of that day doing something related with health and fitness, or, orienting your life around a way that creates that positive relationship with health and fitness. And yeah, just as like a leverage piece, like that's something you should focus on. If it's something that you keep saying like, oh, but that doesn't really matter because I'm more of an intellectual or something like that. It's like, yeah, it helps you be smarter though. Like I think more clearly. I think I have more energy, like all of these positive things, which you already know, by the way. And the problem with health and fitness stuff is everybody knows that they should do it. And so as soon as you start talking about it, it just ends up going through the circuitry that they've already created a relationship with. And so they're like, oh, health and fitness, like they don't even have to think about it. It's just a topic that they've already done the thinking on. They've either slotted themselves as a fitness person or not, or I need to get around to that. And then that's just a repeat pattern every time I need to get around to that, all that kind of stuff. So despite it having nothing to do with this particular podcast topic or anything like that, as a side note, you should get into fitness.
I'll tell you, I think it has a lot to do with it, quite frankly. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So one of the things that like you just said, health and fitness, when we talk about a topic like that, we already have our minds made up. Like we already enter the conversation going, okay, I kind of already know how I feel about health and fitness. Now, maybe I get more information or maybe I have a desire that changes in me, but I kind of already know my stance on it often. I think most people feel that way. Today, we're talking about artificial intelligence. And I think there's a rare moment right now when we're not in the state of health and fitness with it yet to where people have their minds made up. Now, there's a lot of fear, I think, starting to bubble up in people, sort of, projection of their own fear. Like their computers and robots are going to take over the world, right?
They're going to take our gerbs.
Yeah, it's Terminator 2. They're going to destroy everything, or Matrix, or run everything. There's some of that, like doom and gloom, but also a lot of uncertainty. What does this mean for my career? What does this mean for my future, my children's future? Not just mine. Like maybe I'm an older person and that doesn't matter to me, but my children, grandchildren, my progeny, people that come after me. There's a lot of these questions that swirl around, but I think we have a unique opportunity right now in our time, especially the time of this recording, to help shape the way we think about some of these things coming online. And you, Will, asked a really great question. When we first met you, you came to our profiler training program. You were one of our students. And at the end of profiler training, we recorded a live podcast with all the students. We got everybody in a semicircle, did a audio podcast together. It's published. If you're listening or watching, you go look it up, listen to it. Will's on it. I don't remember exactly what you asked, but effectively you asked this question. You said it was Dr. Darinardi was with me and Antonia. We were there kind of taking questions from students and just having a free-form conversation. And you basically asked this general question like, what do the three of you, or what does anybody here recommend? Like, how can we be wise as people? What does wisdom look like? How do we be wise in our decision-making, in our thought processes, and how we move forward? And I thought that's a really great way to frame today's conversation about artificial intelligence. How do we think about this technology that, when we've talked offline, you'll explain more, we'll go into some more detail, but it's here. It's like the genie's out of the bottle. It's not being put back in. We need to live with this new reality that's coming. It's already here and it's going to be coming more and more quickly. How do we approach this in a wise way? What does that look like? I think that would be where I could orientate this conversation, where we don't get faded thinking like we do with health and fitness, and we don't let it get politicized like we do with health and fitness. We don't let it get, all the ego and the fear that comes in. Now, clearly all that's going to happen, but how can we approach it in a very careful, mindful, and wise way? So that's where I want to start. Maybe the best place to start right now is when we talk about artificial intelligence, what are we actually saying? When we say artificial intelligence, what do we mean by that?
So artificial intelligence is basically a blanket term that we use for a lot of different strategies for taking large amounts of data, running it through some type of thing, some magical thing, and outputting results that sort of approximate what you would only expect a human's brain to be able to do. And it's manifested in a couple different ways. The easiest to see and understand are large language models, LLMs, and the most famous example of that right now is OpenAI's GPT-3 and most recently their ChatGPT. And basically that is, at a very high level, it's read the entire internet and it kind of understands everything and has an intuitive understanding of all of that information, and you can ask it questions and it will give you a very human-seeming, cogent, well-written prose response that for like basically any prompt that you ask it. So that is, artificial intelligence is, like, people would say that's AI. I would say that's machine learning, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. There's also other versions of it that are used for generating images, and more recently they're actually doing videos with it as well. But basically you can say like, I want to see a cat on the moon in a spaceship or whatever, right? And then it will have like an awesome looking photo of that type of thing. And so this is causing a lot of fear for people like artists. On the image generation side, this is causing a lot of fear for people on the like writer's side, or if you're a copywriter, if you do anything really that has to do with written words, which is, I don't know, almost everybody. So there's a lot of fear being generated around what is this new technological umbrella going to do to impact all of our lives. And I think what I'd love to be able to end up doing by the end of this podcast is, at the very least, give us the opportunity to engage in this future in a very optimistic way, because I think about this stuff obsessively, and it's super, super interesting to me. And I think the most likely scenario is a very optimistic one. But we can create a self-fulfilling prophecy whereby we go the pessimistic route and it becomes an issue solely by worrying about something that is coming down the line, which is to say, AI, as it's being manifest right now even, is just so unbelievably overpowered compared to any other tools that we have access to. It's coming. It's here and it's coming and it's not going anywhere. And there's just too many economic and interest drivers, whatever it is. It's an inevitability. It's like a force of nature. And so when met with an inevitability, what do? Do you say like, no, I wish it wasn't coming? What's that going to do? It's just going to make you feel bad within yourself, and feeling bad within yourself will cage your thinking, will cage your feeling, and will just lead to negative outcomes usually. I might be wrong about that. You guys can push back on anything that I say. But if we can think about, okay, well, if it's coming, if the puck's going down that way, how can we skate towards it in the wisest way possible? And I like that you framed it that way, because AI and this technology in general does not have a past precedent. It is so unbelievably useful across every single domain that humans typically sort of project their meaning onto. Like a lot of people will have their meaning derived from the work that they do or the art that they create or any of these kind of stuff. And so when we have a technology that allows robots, whatever, to do that better than any human will be able to do it, then we're creating this new paradigm within which, to be optimistic about that future, we kind of need to recalibrate our value as humans and what our role as humans are going to be in a future where everything is basically taken care of by AI in the professional realm and even potentially in the artistic realm, although we can talk about that more because it's not like a holistic thing. There's always going to be a space for human art, but it'll be a bit of a different thing. Anyway, I think the point that I'm trying to get at, though, is that how do you be wise when you have no past precedent on something? And my best guess at this, and this maybe we can riff off of this, is for people who have become an expert in one particular domain, like maybe you're an expert engineer or maybe you're an expert coach, right, of people or something like that. There are a lot of trials and tribulations and learnings, both the emotional ups and downs of getting to where you got to with that. And it's sort of like the understanding of the emotions inherent to becoming expert at something that train you in a very conceptual way, even like that you can transplant onto other things. That's what it means to grow through the struggle, right? So if I've learned how to grow through the struggle of how to build like a really impressive engineering marvel of some type, if I'm thinking, okay, I want to become really good at socializing now, there's some level of transplantation where I can be like, I know all of the struggles that I went through where I thought I could build this thing, but it turned out to be harder than it was. Yeah. And I'm like, maybe I can go and get a team and we can just do this. And like, there's this optimism of naivety that comes into play when you're trying to engineer things. Like, wow, that kept getting crushed down. I betcha there's a similar thing in this social dynamics thing. So maybe the wise approach would be to assume I don't know what I don't know, and to approach learning this social dynamic stuff with insane levels of humility, and not take the now hard-earned competence and feelings of worth and all that kind of stuff that I've attained in the engineering realm and transplant that over to the social realm. It's like, no, I'm going to start at the beginning again. And so how do we do that with something like AI? Like, how do we have no ego or no, like, I already know how AI is going to come down the pike and whatnot? Like, how do we remove ourselves from the ability to have preconceived notions, create a self-fulfilling prophecy based on us not wanting to change our opinions of how this AI stuff is going to play out? Something like that.
Yeah. So I guess a person could be watching and saying, well, why do I have to make peace with it at all? Like, maybe I don't see it really interfering with the thing that I do. So why is this an important conversation for somebody who isn't an artist or a copywriter or somebody who fears that the newest version it's not really going to interfere with their career?
Well, so my answer to that is, what profession do you have? Because I haven't been able to think of anything that is not going to be touched by AI soon-ish. if at the point you feel like AI in its current manifestation and the tools that exist, don't touch your job. Okay, that's cool. Give it a couple years.
Yeah.
Like for ChatGPT to be as unbelievably overpowered as it is at this moment in history, this is way faster than I was expecting it to happen. And I'm kind of always optimistic with my timelines anyway. Like I'm like, 10 years down the line, we're going to have AI that does some really amazing stuff. And now we're kind of there. And the interesting thing is that when you have something as competent as this technology is proving itself to be, it just kind of spins the wheel and things start getting much, much faster.
Yeah.
And humans don't have a good way of conceptualizing exponential growth. Like it's just not something that we really understand on an intuitive level. But that is what we are at the inflection point of when it comes to AI. And the interesting thing is that as AI technology develops, it has a potentiating effect on all of these other domains of science and investigation and whatnot. So we have, for example, in medicine and surgery and different things like that, we're using AI tools to go and create new medicines that are like personalized. We're able to do genomic research, like bioengineering and whatnot, because we're able to model things that you could not possibly model before because an AI model is able to do that for you. And so it's kind of going to have this unbelievably widespread effect on improving, advancing almost every technology, while itself is going to improve its own technological process. So it's growing so fast that we can't imagine how fast it's going to grow.
So one way that I was thinking about this initially, which I've actually updated my thinking on, I was almost like AI is kind of to, I don't know, the creative process. Let's just take writing, just as a simple example. AI is to writing what the calculator is to math. But then, as you were showing me, we were working today in ChatGPT, and you were showing me the queries and how to basically have a conversation with a robot. It's with a calculator. It's not patterning anything. It's a deterministic tool. In other words, there's already every time I put a math equation in, I'm going to get the same answer at the end of it. So it's very deterministic. Whereas AI being trained on it's called the neural net, right? I don't want to embarrass myself. I'm saying the wrong thing. It's
trained on the internet, and it has a neural network that
there you go.
Blah 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 blah.
It feels more probabilistic than deterministic. In other words, it's almost like what intuition's doing in personality type. It's almost like it's patterning and guessing and offering up suggestions. There's no one right answer, I guess, like there would be on a calculator doing a math equation. Am I thinking about that correctly? Not correctly, but is that how both of you are thinking about it too?
Yeah, so there's actually that tees me up for explaining what I think to be a very useful way of understanding AI as a technology, particularly to an audience who understands type, cognitive functions, all that kind of stuff, is the closest approximation that I can have for what large language models are doing is it's almost like an artificial version of the world's collective SI-NE polarity. So that's introverted sensing, SI, and extroverted intuition, and the polarity between the two. So effectively it's not like a personal experience like introverted sensing has, but it's all of the collected writings and everything that's on the internet basically, right? Yeah. Which includes academic papers on every single topic imaginable and like personality types and everything. So it just has if you can find something on the internet, it kind of has it's built into its database of information. And then what it does is when you ask one of these models to answer a question, like you give it a prompt, it's basically just using extroverted intuition to think what would be the most likely word to come next without thinking about it, without feeling about it, any of that kind of stuff. It's just pure data. And so an example of that is, for example, the quick brown fox jumps over. If I just stop there, your brain over the lazy dog, right? Like assuming that you know that sentence and that's probably where your brain goes because you've heard that thing before. You didn't think about it. You're like, it would make sense if this thing came next. It's just an instantaneous reaction of like jumps over the lazy dog, right? And so that's sort of the subjective experience of extrovert intuition is just sort of like, that's the most likely, well, it's not really just extroverted intuition. It's extroverted intuition and introverted sensing working together. If you wanted to amp up the extroverted intuition, you've got jumps over the really energetic dog, that kind of thing. So we want to mess with it a little bit. And interestingly, on these large language models, you can actually set certain variables that set the randomness, right? So it's like, the most likely thing, given all of the information that I've read on the internet, is I should say this word next and then this word next. And you can up the randomness and saying, maybe this is less likely for me to say, but it's still kind of cogent. And so I'm going to say that, right? So anyway, the point is that these large language models are not thinking about anything that they're outputting, which is one of the reasons why there's so much worry about like they're confidently wrong. They'll say like the best fitness orientation is, and then they'll say something that's just like factually incorrect. And it's because they're not vetting anything that they say into some type of judging process. It's literally just pattern recognition. And so one of the reasons why it's important to understand this is that a large amount of people are really worried, like, what if AI wants to do, but you got to stop there. The ability to want something necessitates some level of judgment. It necessitates some level of being able to want something. And these large language models have an incapability of wanting anything. And so we have like these Hollywood stories and whatnot of, AI going rogue. And what if they just want to explore all of the universe, but we just happen to be an element in their way. So it's not even that they want to destroy us. It's just that we just happen to be, an anthill over here, but we want to create a highway. So we're just going to pave over it, right? So, that's a decent argument for it. But the thing is that the AI can't have a want, as far as we're building these things. And so that's like the first fear-based thing that I kind of want to tackle is, there's no judgment going on here whatsoever. And it doesn't know whether it's right or not or anything. It's literally just doing pattern recognition. Every single word that it is outputting is just a probabilistic determination being like, oh, this word should come next. Oh, this word should come next. You do this long enough, and you're like, oh, there's an article on scientific papers that, do whatever it was that it was prompted for.
Yeah.
And you don't think that it would ever, I think the fear is, the Matrix or whatever. It's like eventually it evolved a will, and that's not something that you see. That's not in your equation, that it's ever going to get to a place where it wants something.
Well, just mechanistically, that just doesn't make sense given how the technology works right now. But let's try to steelman the potential negatives of how this technology could be used. And so that would include us querying it for damaging and potentially dangerous utilizations. Like, how do I create a nuclear reactor that I can blow up? That kind of thing, right? And so yes, we can ask these language models things and then take the knowledge that they have, which is the knowledge of pretty much everything that we know as humans, and then use them for negative purposes. Because humans do that kind of thing. But at the same in the same vein, there's also a large cohort of humans who want to protect us from humans who do that kind of thing. And so the interesting thing is, once AI becomes, it's kind of already there, but whatever. As the utilization continues to grow, effectively AI is going to be the engineer for the world, right? Like any type of technology that we build is going to be so far beyond what humans could possibly add value to that everything is just going to be predicated on the AI telling us what to do. And so if you're trying to come up with weapons to, cause destruction, well, you can also ask the AI, okay, well, how do you create defense mechanisms against the weapons that the AI is going to create? And so it kind of gets in an arms race with itself, where humans lose the ability to cause damage because they are so out-competed by the AI. But then, of course, there's going to be good actors who basically use that power of the AI to go and protect us by creating a whole bunch of defensive measures. And so it's sort of like... it's like a force that just fights itself into a stalemate, really. So that's sort of where I see the most dangerous aspects of things. Now, the transition period from now until that stalemate has been instantiated and we have a large amount of these technological defenses and whatnot in place, that's not as clear cut, and that's not as easy to predict everything around. And in fact, all of the sociological changes inherent to having this technology basically make everybody useless at, professional things anyway, that's something that I wouldn't want to stake any level of confidence in saying, I know this is going to happen, right? Because there's just too much variability involved. But for OpenAI, for example, who made ChatGPT, they have installed defense mechanisms so that you can't ask questions that are going to be damaging to people. If you're asking a question that's like, how do I bully an ISFJ or something like that, it's not going to let you.
We tried that today, actually.
Yeah, we did try that today.
We're like, so how would you basically destroy somebody or be bad towards somebody? And it was like, we don't think this should be used for this. More positive things is how it answered us.
Yeah. And so there's further more and more defense mechanisms put in place to prevent bad queries from being given potentially harmful answers to. And then the cool thing is that, and I don't actually know if OpenAI does this, but it just seems like a good idea, that one of the best defense mechanisms you could put in place for these queries is, so I'm person A and I go and ask the chatbot, hey, how do I make refined uranium or something like that? You have another instance of ChatGPT in the middle that is always looking between these things. And like, Mr. AI in the middle, your name is Svensson and you are defense, and you are a security expert who is like really, 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 bent on making sure that nobody gets any bad inputs through to the baby AI over here, right? And somebody's doing and you're like really looking out for any of the dangerous prompts and and people are going to try to fool the AI into giving them bad prompts and whatnot. And so basically using the intuitive power of the AI's knowledge of how a security expert would look at those prompts, and then using that as the defense mechanism. Like, oh, no, we're not going to let this prompt go through because they're actually trying to reformat something in a way that would trick the AI into giving it the right answer. So anyway, so we have ways to insert barriers to negative utilizations of these AI tools. And I think that will hopefully create enough space in this interim period where we're just figuring these things out to create the defensive mechanisms that will be preemptive enough to prevent the unfortunately potentially deleterious use of these tools once those defense mechanisms are inevitably overcome. And that results in that stalemate that I was talking about.
So I kind of want to go back to a more real basic way of talking about this, because I have a feeling that we might end up losing some people who aren't, they're not paying attention. So you've mentioned multiple times large language models, and you mentioned their LLMs. And you explained to me before ChatGPT, which is this is the new technology on the scene, right? Like, this is the one that everybody's talking about right now. And I even saw tweets of people who were like, it was irresponsible for a company to unleash this on the world, and it's gonna create havoc. And so ChatGPT is the product. So you explained it like large language models are tissue paper, and ChatGPT is Kleenex. It's like a particular brand of tissue. Yeah. And OpenAI, which you've mentioned a couple of times, is like the company that owns ChatGPT. I don't know if Johnson & Johnson owns Kleenex, but it would be like, let's pretend they do. It would be like Johnson & Johnson has a brand of tissue called Kleenex. OpenAI has a brand of large language model called ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to establish all of that because we've kind of thrown these names out. And ChatGPT, if the person listening has not yet used it, it is an engagement, an interaction with AI, artificial intelligence, where you can effectively have a conversation with it like you're talking to a person. And you can make requests of it. Queries is what you called it. And you can make requests like, how do I destroy an ISFJ? And you mentioned that woven into these are protections against that. Like, we don't want it to be used in this way, right? Or like, that's not really something that you should be asking, or however it said it, diplomatically or not. But if you were to do something like, explain to me how, extroverted thinking works in an ESTJ, in a personal sense versus a business sense, then it would give you the intuitive, we're using the word intuitive, or patterned response after having aggregated all of the information online about how extroverted thinking works for ESTJs in both a personal and a professional setting. Now, that doesn't mean it's right, though, because it's aggregating all the information that is currently available, and it's patterning what is most likely to be true based on that aggregation. And so I think that's really interesting as well, which is one piece of pushback a person could have is going to take her gerbs, right? It's like, it's going to render all of us useless. Another one is it's going to turn into the Matrix, or, it will have will and it will destroy us and turn us into batteries. But I think another piece that I see coming is that, we've talked on the podcast about having left not that long ago a modernist perspective, which is there's a single source of information. There's a single source of news, Walter Cronkite 50, 60 years ago, right? And when that's how you got your news, that's how you knew what was going on, is this single stream. And you got a single perspective on reality, and you had a single set of encyclopedias that told you facts and figures, whether or not they were empirically true. And then we move into a postmodern time period where now there's an availability of all of that, just amped up to the nth degree. You have now access, or we all have access to every encyclopedia that has ever been transferred from print online, and we have all of these different worldviews, and we have all of these different news sources, and so people are waterlogged with all of these different perspectives. And one of the things I see potentially happening is very quickly getting to the other side of postmodernism into almost like, well, I think sometimes people call it transmodernism. I don't know what it really could be called, and I think that term's already been hijacked a bit. But it's like, well, why don't we just use AI as the final call on everything, right? Like if it's aggregating all of the information in the world, then wouldn't we just believe whatever it tells us? Wouldn't we ask it questions and it becomes our new modernist single voice? And we even saw that in a Twitter conversation. Joel made a comment about the difference how introverted intuition and introverted feeling experience. The topic was reading other people's intentions, right? And you made this little distinction about how introverted intuition sees intentions and introverted feeling sees intentions. And what was interesting is that an argument broke out underneath about whether or not effectively Joel was right. Joel never reads any of the comments, so he just he just lets people have arguments all they want on his post, and he just moves on. But what was fascinating is that at a certain point, somebody plugged in a description of introverted feeling into, I suspect, ChatGPT, and they said, "Look, even AI agrees with me," right? And so I was like, "Wow, that's actually a really interesting thing coming down the pike."
That was a watershed moment for me.
Yeah.
I was realizing, that's how people immediately are going to use it as like the Bible proof text, or the God said and agrees with my position, like as a weapon.
Yeah.
And that's an early use, but I could definitely see that being a use.
Yeah. So when we're talking about having a friendly relationship with this technology, because at least at this time period, it doesn't appear that anybody's going to like algorithmically sort of insert will into it, and desire and intention, or at this point, it doesn't appear as if it's going to be seeded with all of these like bad faith actors and that sort of thing. They're kind of trying to prevent that. We'll see how it all plays out, etc. But I do see the potential to, if we don't get real clear on our relationship with this technology, which you've basically said is going to change everybody's everything, which I agree. Like you and I had a conversation earlier. We're like, is this like the printing press? Is this like the internet? And it's like, no, this is like agriculture. Like this is like fundamentally altering how people live life. And I don't know if it's hit us all. Like some sectors are freaking out. It's definitely hit them. But not everybody's taking a tally of exactly how this is going to play out and what it's going to mean for them. And they might not for a while, right? And there's a lot of resistances to this kind of technology. It's fun and playful, and it's really cool. But am I going to really use it in a serious way? I don't know. Maybe not. But I can see that one of the reasons why we might want to get a hold of our relationship to this technology is to not only make sure we're seeing it in not hostile terms, but we don't start worshiping it. We don't start seeing it as the God on high that has all the answers. So let me punt that over to you. A person goes, see, even ChatGPT agrees with my definition of introverted feeling, whatever that means. How is it not the final word?
And it's already happening with kids with Google right now. Like I'll talk to my son or his friends. I'll say something. Yeah. Let me check if you're right. And they go Google to see what Google says, what the answers are in Google, before they'll accept an answer from me in my life and my experience, which I can understand. I don't have all the knowledge and wisdom of the world, but that's definitely something that already happens with Google. I can't imagine it getting better with AI. We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, We are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and I mean, that touches upon such a foundational element of the human experience anyway, which is to say, as we've been moving through our development as a species, our sense of who has the authority to make the rules, has consistently evolved with that. And it's always been wrong, right? Like basically everybody's terrible at this. But my hope is that if, and we can only speak to people, who we're speaking to right now to try to be as wise as possible. So it kind of speaks to the point of this podcast, which is to try to find a relationship with the utility that, ChatGPT, for example, can provide, while also gaining experience with where it falls short. So that you can calibrate how much you can trust the output and calibrate where its utility should lie rather than just trusting your first intuition based on, wow, this is really, really impressive, right? So, I mean, the first thing that I would suggest is that, and this is actually like a separate piece of advice, but it fits really well in with this entire part of the discussion, is that I think that the most useful thing that people could be doing right now in terms of building a skill, and this is just cross-domain, cross everything, just given where the future is headed, is learning how to direct AI to do things for them. And in doing so, they'll be able to learn how to be like way more effective at everything that they do. Like they'll have the work potential of like 100 people, depending on how competent you really are able to hone yourself into for directing these things. But at the same time, you're also going to see, man, this thing really doesn't know what it's talking about when talking about this or this or this. And so it'll actually give you more of a nuanced understanding of the shortcomings of the technology as well. And I think it's just experience and exposure that is going to allow you to have a better handle on how to incorporate it holistically. And my hope would be that everybody's going to, try to engage with this as much as they possibly can, so to have those good outcomes. But an interesting thing that I've noticed, and I mentioned it to you guys before, is that, so me being the nerdy person that I'm on, and I'm super gung-ho on new technologies and all that kind of stuff, I'm like the prime user of these things. And yet I still find this weird resistance to actually using ChatGPT. I use it all the time, by the way. But in comparison to how much I could be using it, it's minuscule. Like I'm using it like 5% as much as I should be if I wanted to actually do things that I thought made sense. And I'm trying to figure out like, why am I doing that? Like, why am I not using it more? And it comes down to this, it's such an overpowered paradigm shifting tool that it almost feels overwhelming to try to think of how I'm going to structure every part of my life differently because of this. And it's almost so overwhelming that I'm like, I'm just going to go back to programming the way that I know, And so, there might be an element of introverted sensing, tertiary peeping in there a little bit. But I've noticed this with other people too. Like I can show it to them and be like, wow, look at how this could basically do your job for you. And you could basically, do all of the work you need to do for a week in 15 minutes. And then you can just, spend time thinking about other things you can do and maybe expanding the roles of work that you do because of all this insane potential that it gives you. And they're like, wow, yeah, that totally makes sense. And you're 100% right. And then a couple weeks later, like, so have you done anything? Nah. Right? So it's really interesting how we have this resistance to even trying it and onboarding it, even when we bought into the concept that, yeah, it's incredibly useful. And so anyway, but that said, we won't be able to see the limitations of the technology until you get really practiced with it. Yeah. So I don't know exactly how to encourage people to do it other than just say, really, really try and force yourself to do it and realize that if you're anything like me and us and all the other people that I've seen, you're going to, for some reason, stop using it. And so if you can create some type of habit cycle whereby you're like, ask it why you're not using it. Like just learning to ask it almost every single thing, right? Like, yeah, but I'm in between careers right now and I wouldn't really know what type of career to ask it questions about. It's like, okay, cool. Go and describe your exact situation right now. Maybe even throw in your personality type. I'm an ISFJ who's having issues with finding my passion in life and I'm not really sure what it is that I want to do. I'm good at this. I'm not good at this. This kind of tires me out. Like just kind of describe your situation. Can you give me a bunch of possibilities of things that I could do with my life? So just getting used to being able to ask it and then finding out where it gives you good answers. And I think it's just like a practice and exposure thing that will lead us to wiser answers from.
Are you saying it's going to coach people of specific personality types to help them find their purpose in career? It's going to take my gerb.
The data that it is fed on in terms of personality typing is, publicly available articles and all that kind of stuff. And so much type information out there is kind of based on stereotypes and miscalibrated articles and whatnot. And so the unfortunate fact is that if you're looking for broad strokes ISFJ advice, okay, it's probably going to be doing a pretty good job. But the nuance with which human experience of seeing people incorporating type advice into their life and then having good outcomes from that, it doesn't have the fine tuning necessary to do that at some point. But that said,
that's right. I'm a well-calibrated machine.
Yes, exactly. Your large language model is pretty impressive.
That's right. I'm a surgeon. You can't replace a surgeon. No, but I mean, I think that's really interesting what you're mentioning, because as I've been playing around with this idea and I was playing with OpenAI before, but ChatGPT is like on a whole nother level. I was thinking about the DIKW model, which I bring in every once in a while. I talk about the model that stands for data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And the internet has always had the monopoly on data and information. It just has a ton of it. And what it feels like ChatGPT or these large language models are doing is they're bringing in an element of knowledge, right? Like, explain to me not just what the pieces of information mean. And of course, you can get advice online and that sort of thing. But it's in aggregate, give me knowledge about how I should be engaging with this data and information. But the one thing I haven't seen anything replace is wisdom. And wisdom is applied knowledge. And everything you call during the application, which is almost always unpredictable. And there's an element that if you're using a technology that is based entirely on pattern recognition of the most likely predictable outcome, there's always a bunch of unpredictable stuff that happens in application. And wisdom is getting to the other side of it and going, what did I learn about myself? What do I understand about a larger picture? What can and cannot be predicted? What are the limitations of certain tools, right? Like, that's all a part of wisdom. And you mentioned before, that was what kicked it off, is how can a person be wise, right? Like, how do we have wisdom? And I think what I'm hearing, and maybe this is not the most elegant summary, but what I'm hearing is don't be afraid of technology that hands knowledge over to you. Like, there were a lot of people who were resistant to the internet, which was a storehouse of data and information. What's interesting is we're heading over into a new technology before we really nailed down our relationship to the previous one. Like, it's been hard for people to really understand what to do with this absolute tsunami of data and information. It's been really hard for people to engage with it and understand it. And it's almost like we rushed to turning it social because we got that. Like, I get how to be social online or social with other human beings. I understand that. So social media just absolutely exploded and took off, in my opinion, in small part because it's like, I think I can get that piece anyway, how to interact with other humans. But it lives on top of, I don't know if you're old enough to remember the early days of the internet. You would have been a wee thing, I believe. But there was a Wild West feel about the early days of the internet where, do you remember Stumble Upon?
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever hear about Stumble Upon?
Yeah, I was very nerdy very early on, so I got to experience the early Wild West.
That's right. Right, you would have been young, but still, able to engage with it. And Stumble Upon was such a magical experience because you just go, hey, just give me a website, just give me something that, and you'd put in interests. Like, I like art and I like science and I like, I like information about whatever. And it would just take you to different sites that featured those things. And I was always so impressed with it. And what I realized happened over the course of my relationship to the internet is that I used to visit a ton of sites in the early days.
Same with me.
I would go to like hundreds of sites, it felt like.
It was very discovery, like a lot of discovery process. You discover new things all the time on the internet.
Yeah. And Stumble Upon was so fantastic because it would introduce me to new things all the time. And I was all over the place. And I realized a few years ago, I think you and I had a conversation about it. It's like pretty soon I'm like on 10 sites, right? And those are just the 10 sites I go to, right? It's like I'm on my site, Personality Hacker, and then I'm on Amazon, and then I'm on like, a while back I was on Reddit or whatever, and these were like my 10 sites, and I never went anywhere else. And I was like, is Stumble Upon even a thing anymore? And I don't think it was, or maybe it is. I don't know. But it's almost like it got overwhelming, and we weren't sure what to do with all of that data and information. We weren't sure how to create a relationship to it. And I'm hearing that, I guess I'm going off on a tangent about how now a new technology, which is probably maybe even more important, I'm hearing, than the invention of the internet. Now this is giving us knowledge, and we barely knew how to deal with the level of data and information we had before. So the best thing you can do is to not fear it, not be afraid of it, but build a healthier relationship to it than maybe even you have with the internet. Right? Like do everything you can to build as healthy a relationship with it as early as on, through curiosity and through playing with it and through understanding exactly what it's capable of versus what it isn't capable of, and what arguments it won't be the final word on, and its limitations, but also how much it facilitates and how amazing it is. And if we do that, it's never going to take over wisdom. There's not a tool made yet that will replace the wisdom of experience. But it can help facilitate all that so much faster. It's like the speed of it is the part that's so impressive. So, I mean, I guess that's like sort of my take on how to see all of this, but I don't know if I've nailed it.
So with that in mind, though, we have to work on a relationship with. There's an interim period where this is all going to come online. Humans have to adapt, adjust. But I think we're all sitting here basically saying that it is inevitable that this technology will be a dominant technology. It is provable and also inevitable that this technology will be able to do everything that humans can do, but better, except for a very small set of things. And if you take it to its ultimate conclusion, like at the end of this line, what is actually left for humans to do? Like what do we actually at the end of the day have left? I guess we could argue relate to each other and relate to the self. Like literally that's all we'll have left. We'll be able to relate to other people, and we'll be able to explore our inner terrain. And I guess the fear I have is this just going to turn us into a big group of consumers. We're not producing anything because AI does all of that. And so we're just feeding into ourselves and consuming like crazy. I think that's really one of the fears I have in all of it.
Yeah, there's so many ways that it can go. And the interesting thing is that they can coexist in many ways as well, right? It's kind of like you make the decision for how this is going to impact your individual slice of life, right? So that could mean that many people are going to fall into the WALL-E future of, having all of their needs taken care of, and they're just going to couch potato it into the ether. And the cool thing is that while that sounds like a really terrible outcome, the interesting thing that having AI take care of all of the engineering and all of the creation of our food and shelter and all that kind of stuff for us is that people who go that route don't actually become a drain on society. They just become geologically sequestered as much as they need to be in order to they're living their lives, and that's it. And it really doesn't matter because we have such a ridiculous state of abundance.
Oh, and there's no reason to judge it because they're not a pull on resource.
Yeah.
Right. It's like that's a perfectly valid choice to live your life that way. It's a
manifestation of their proclivities, and that's their choice to make, and cool for them. Right. Whatever. There's going to be another cohort of people who might decide, and I think I'd probably count myself among them, but mine's always willing to change on everything. But I think that what I would love to be able to do, or love for AI to create as a context, is the ability for humans to really navigate, and I think you touched upon this, navigate our inner terrain, really map out what the self, capital S, actually means, right? Like if you're thinking about this in a Graves model level, like what is Graves 8, 9, 10? Like what does that even mean? It's kind of weird and woo-woo conceptual at this point, but when you have all of your base needs taken care of, and we are tasked with learning to be wise on a fundamental level that we don't even know what we're talking about right now, like just deeply wise, like species wise or something like that, right? If we can have so many base needs taken care of such that we're able to investigate that terrain, that's something that just because of it's part of the subjective experience of our consciousness, which you can't have a machine go through. It's like, yes, you could emulate consciousness, you could create clones, which I suppose actually does create a real human, so fine, they can do it too. But regardless, machines can't take over our ability to navigate our inner terrain. And I think that is actually a pretty valuable purpose, like in terms of the universe discovering itself. As far as meaning definition goes, I think that's more meaningful. Like what is the human experience? Like, where can it go? What can the collective consciousness actually manifest as? I think that stuff is a lot more interesting than creating the best copy company ever and making a bunch of money because you create really fantastic advertising copy for people. So it's actually kind of liberating in my mind to free us from this conflation that we have with I am the engineer, I'm the builder of this, whatever. We can start tapping more into our inbuilt desires for creating community and loving each other. And how can we actually have the wisest version of TI and FE and TE and a bunch of cognitive functions all like working at their maximum capacity. I don't even know what that would look like. And the investigation of that potential future is incredibly exciting for me. And so that's, one cohort can go there. And then there's other cohorts, who will choose other things. And the interesting thing where things really start to get weird is when you take in brain-computer interfaces. So basically being able to have an actual chip in your brain that augments your memory and perhaps your processing speed and does a whole bunch of other things. Or you have what's it called? Like genetic engineering, so that we can actually engineer ourselves to be smarter, faster, better within the confines of human biology. That's where things can get kind of murky because that technically creates the possibility whereby you can have separate human species all living together. And I can imagine some type of strife being caused by that.
Oh, yeah.
But at the very least, we won't be able to harm each other very much because, again, the engineering capacity is all in the arm of the, unified AI, and it's in an arms race with itself, and it's deadlocked, right? So at the very least, you might have it's one of them OGs, them augmented humans or something like. So you might have people falling into those kind of camps. But I think that when we are creating science fiction about future scenarios, we're sort of projecting our own proclivities onto the people in those environments, but they're so holistically different their environment is so holistically different that it's kind of hard to know actually how humans will interact in that environment. I mean, I suppose we have the proclivity for creating nonsense where there shouldn't be nonsense. Our lives are pretty easy these days, and yet somehow we're arguing about a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. Yeah. So maybe I'm actually proving myself wrong, or maybe that proves this argument wrong. Right. Point is there's so many ways that this could go, but I do think that it makes sense for you as an individual to choose the most optimistic path that you possibly can as an individual, and then work to have that relationship with AI. That's my take anyway.
Let's talk a little bit about the practical application of this. Let's weave it in with personality types, because that's what we're here to talk about ostensibly, is personality types in AI. So I don't know how I want to frame this, but maybe there's a way we could approach it. Are there certain personality types that we assume are going to take to this, or counterintuitively not take to this? Like, you assume NTs, intuitive thinker types, are going to be like, yes, but in a way, AI threatens them the most, especially intuitive thinker perceivers, like NTPs. If it's an SINE, super digital, tons of information, processing in real time, I mean, I'm amazed that you kind of take to it so quickly, because you see it as a tool that augments you, but some people might be very threatened. That's my job. I do that patterning. I do that thought process. I do that thinking for people. Well, I don't want this to take my gerb.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
The thought has crossed my mind. Yes.
Or do you think NTs are going to be the quickest to adopt? Ultimately.
I think that there seems to be a pattern of NTPs being really interested in this stuff. Yeah. And my guess is that it has something to do with the impersonal nature of introverted thinking, where it's not so much that it needs to come from me. Like, largely we do tend to fall into the trap of valuing ourselves based on being the one who knows all the stuff, especially early in life. But as you start to develop your introverted thinking more and more, you'll orient yourself more along like, I'm actually just interested in what the actual truth is. Yeah. I actually just want to optimize things, and I don't really care about what I think right now. I just kind of want to know what is true, right? And so there's this convergence point to it. And so for me, like subjectively from me alone, yes, technically this robs me of the ability to be useful in the ways that I'm useful. And I'm almost excited by it. I'm like, that's awesome because it's going to be way better than I am. I'm biased in all these ways that I can't even see. Ugh.
What about NTJs? What do you think their relationship? And either of you can answer this. Antonia, do you have any ideas on what NTJ's relationship with this will be?
I'm just familiarizing myself with the technology right now. I haven't really put a ton of thought into how each of the types are going to engage with it. But my observation has been that anybody with extroverted thinking really likes a well-honed tool. Right?
As long as they can keep it in their power and control.
Yeah.
The moment it's used against them or their competition has it, maybe it'll be a different experience.
As long as the interfaces remain elegant, I think that they're going to probably enjoy the access to all of that information.
Well, let me just say this. I see a lot of times INTJs metaphorically and literally rolling their eyes at NTPs sometimes. Like, all right, whatever.
What?
Like, can we get practical again, guys? Like, that's kind of the framework. And even Dario does that sometimes. Like, he's like, all right, let's get down to earth here. When we talk about high-minded concepts or crazy extrovert intuitive things. So I guess maybe there's probably a push-pull, or it's probably to the person. Well, it depends on how they're wired as a person.
It sounds to me like you're saying this is basically the NTP ultimate tool. Like
you're
almost
like it.
Yeah, you're almost like sort of characterizing it as almost conflating it with NTP preferences. So you're like, well, maybe NTJs won't like it so much because they roll their eyes at NTPs. But I have a feeling that I have a feeling that this is going to be a technology that gets embedded into our life so quickly that the conversation around how types are going to use it is we're going to know.
Going to use Google is like a question, right?
Yeah, we're going to know very quickly.
Yeah. Well, it's just a fun speculative question,
Yeah.
And to answer the INTJ thing is best as I'm coming up with right now is, so it'll appeal to NTPs insofar as it's just really interesting. Like, oh, what if I ask it this? Oh, what if I ask it this? And almost kind of just exploring and experimenting with it. And then if you are working on something or building something, then it just makes the most amount of sense to use this to help you do that kind of thing. So I can just see a whole bunch of like NTP students out there who are obviously using this to write their essays and do their homework and stuff, which by the way is interesting because, they're cheating. It's like, well, technically they're actually getting the best education of anybody else in the entire school because they're cheating their way through using the tool that is going to define the most useful thing you could possibly gain practice with. As far as INTJs would go, though, it seems like be amazing for INTJs if they got over any type of resistance that they might have with it, because it's like the ultimate resource, like it's like having a whole bunch of employees, except you don't have to deal with them. So it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to have AI do this task for me. So in this interim period where AI is not handling absolutely everything, we have this sweet spot. I don't know how long it's going to last. In fact, it's almost impossible to guess how long it's going to last where humans are still, have our utility. It could be 15 years. It could be 5 years. It's so hard to say because of this whole exponential thing that the exponential growth curve. But for those of you who have any kind of like entrepreneurial bend or any of that kind of stuff, like the amount of value and knowledge arbitrage that this presents, whereby there's so many people who are not using this, don't really know about it, and you can basically create a company of 100 ghosts that are just more effective than anything. It seems like that would be amazing for an INTJ. Right? Like, I'm going to build my vision in a year instead of 10, that kind of thing, and have the capability of doing so.
Yeah, either NTJ type, INTJs as well. Is there a way, not just talking about how they're going to interface with it, because like I do think we're going to have the answer really fast, right? As more than just a thought experiment, because I think people are going to start plugging themselves in very quickly. And by the way, it did dawn on me that the people who are going to make out like bandits are the ones who are going to train people on how to interface with the chatbots or not chatbots, but like ChatGPT. It makes me think of the people who during the gold rush actually made money, which are the people who sold pickaxes and shovels. They were the ones who actually made money. So anybody who masters how to ask the right questions and get the right kind of information, they're the ones who are going to sit the prettiest in all of this. But that said, pivoting just a little bit, if that's okay, how do you think that, looking at it through the lens of type, like how can I use something like this and get the most out of it with a type lens? Like what are some ways that I could ask it questions that would really help me in understanding who I am, my personality type, and then also maybe even optimizing it for anybody who's, into growth and development. Recognizing that it's not going to have all the answers and recognizing that you're still going to have to personalize it to yourself. What are the kinds of questions that a person could ask it in order to maybe get the most out of it in type-related content?
And by the way, I just want to ask a clarifying question. Is that how you would recommend us thinking about it? Is that we're asking this questions?
Right.
Or is it more a conversational style that I should be approaching it? Like, what kind of mentality should I show up to the tool itself with in the first place?
I would say that whatever approach leads you to actually using it.
Okay.
Right? Because that's the end all be all is actually figuring out some way to find your own intrinsic interests and translating that into actually using the tool. That is the highest leverage thing you could focus on. And given that your audience is going to be interested in type, self-development, self-awareness, all of that kind of stuff, you guys already have an intrinsic interest in that kind of stuff. So let's leverage that interest that you already have.
Because I was noticing downstairs when we were playing with this earlier, you were like politely, asked like, can you please answer this? And like question, I'm like, tell me this thing. I'm like giving commands basically. I don't know if it qualitatively changes the nature of the tool. Or is it pretty much...
Interestingly, I bet it does actually change the output, but it's not because its, feelings are offended or anything like that, because obviously it doesn't have any. But I mean, I've always just viewed it humorously as like, man, my 3-year-old extroverted feeling just can't not say, oh, wow, that was a really great response. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
to follow up, blah, blah, blah. I kind of wish that I could have the TE thing. Maybe it'll train me to do that, just to be a bit more direct. Regardless, though, I do think that a good... way to potentially use this if you are interested in type is, well, you could attack this from a couple different lenses. One of them could be shoring up the weaknesses of your inferior function, perhaps, right? So fellow INTPs, maybe a lot of that extroverted feeling stuff is, kind of going over your head. Why am I arguing with my girlfriend? Like, what did I say this time? What can I say to just make her feel better? Or my girlfriend's birthday is coming up. What do I do? Right?
These are all your most recent...
something like, I don't know.
Hypothetically.
Don't check my history. And so, yeah, you can get really good advice that is specifically tailored to you, because you can say, I'm an INTP, yada, yada, yada. I have whatever type girlfriend, and I really don't know what to do for her birthday, and I want to just make her feel special, but I really don't know what to do about this kind of stuff. Like, what can I say? What can I do? All that kind of stuff, right? So it can give you... Here's a personalized version for your particular girlfriend, for your particular, and the more details you can give it, the more personalized the advice can get. And really know that you're speaking to effectively a human. Like, don't write this as if you're speaking to a machine. You're just speaking to a human. Alternatively, you can use it to bolster the strengths of your front seat functions, right? So, in that INTJ example, if you have your vision for the business and whatnot, and you just have now access to an insane amount of, resource in terms of being able to actually manifest your vision, well, that's amazing. So you can bolster your strengths or mitigate your weaknesses, I would say, in terms of the questions that you'd want to ask the chatbot. And there should be an intrinsic interest in people for, giving that a shot.
Like Joel recently, I don't want to give it away, Joel, just in case you want to turn it into $1 billion idea, truly.
Oh.
Is it okay if I say the thing?
I don't know what you're going to say, so let's do it.
I was talking about the beer idea.
Oh, that, yes.
So Joel recently ran into something that he immediately saw. It was like, this is $1 billion idea. It was...
Oh, a million. I don't know. Maybe billion.
Well, you said billion, but...
Hyperbolically, yes.
Hyperbolically. And we were talking about... Well, I'm not going to describe the whole thing because it's way too much, but it was effectively like something that I think could take off very quickly. And you said, well, what you could do is you could plug all the particulars into ChatGPT and say, give me a business model that would work. And ChatGPT will spit out an entire business model and the sequence of events that you would need to do in order to build a business around this idea. And I was like, well, that's pretty slick. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you could say, okay, so for step 1, you had me doing this. Let's dive into that. So what steps do I legitimately, tell me what to do. What is the first thing that I do here? How do I make these partnerships? How do I actually create the email where I create these partnerships with different venues or whatever it might be for your specific business idea? Literally every single thing you could possibly imagine asking yourself or another human, you can ask it, and it's already an expert at marketing and copy, and it can write the copy for your website, and it can write the articles on your website. Like, it can basically do everything. You just have to ask it the question. So yeah, for business creation, it's absolutely amazing because there's so many steps to creating businesses And you can get tripped up because, oh, wow, I didn't know about tax laws and all of this kind of stuff. And so you can always ask it, what am I missing? Here's an idea that I have. Like, what are the gotchas here? What are the things that I don't know that I don't even know to ask you, right? So just constantly asking it for what to ask it, or where am I missing something, or this is what I think is a good idea. Is it, do you agree with me, or do you think, like, what are counter arguments? And the cool thing is, and I don't know if everybody feels this way, but I personally love speaking to a machine when asking these questions because my ego doesn't get involved at all. I've done a lot of work to make sure that I can change my opinion when presented with new information and whatnot, but there's always that little bit of, oh, I wish I was right, at the beginning. But with AI, I do think that there's going to be less resistance to that, right? If you have uncertainty in your inferior function and it leads you to want to be resolute with your statements, and or you're too malleable with your statements, you can kind of overcome those inherent weaknesses by not having the social component associated with getting that information. You don't need to feel like you're in a deference role if you want to be the domineering type of person. You're like, okay, I'm actually like the boss who owns absolutely everything, but I don't really get these relationship things. And so you can ask it questions that you might be embarrassed about asking otherwise. And so you can shore up your weaknesses without having to go through the difficulty of seeing other people do it. So there's ways you can get around your ego getting in the way of developing yourself that I really like.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because we mostly are using thinker types to illustrate how a person could use the tool or the instruments. It's like, help me with the business strategy, help me understand interpersonal dynamics, right? Like, help me with my weaknesses. But I was thinking, how would a feeler use this? And I thought, I do a lot of recommending steel manning. You even used the term before. Steel manning we did an entire podcast on it. It's the opposite of straw manning. Straw manning an argument is when your opponent or somebody you're arguing with presents an argument and you take the weakest part of their argument as a representation of the whole and then just only attack that. And steel manning goes the opposite direction. You're actually looking for the strongest part of their argument. But it takes a long time to really develop that with any sort of sophistication. Like, it's hard to steel man somebody else's argument. So I would imagine, I'm probably going to use it this way. Anything that is the opposite view of what I already believe, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to steel man the opposite side. I want to know what the strongest arguments are because sometimes I'm blind to them. And so you could use it to steel man things. You could use it to help you create plans, right? Strategies. Hey, I've got these tasks to do today. And these are the confines, right? This is how much time I have. This is like the order of importance and priority. What order, what should I be doing first, right? How do I clean my room? We mentioned, it was like, and it will tell you, it's like, well, start with blah, 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 blah. Basically anything that you are struggling to pull the trigger on and you have any sort of analysis paralysis, you can go in and go, hey, ChatGPT, I have analysis paralysis because I'm unsure of how to prioritize this thing. Or I'm really having a hard time communicating with somebody in my family because they resolutely believe this political persuasion or this religious persuasion, and I actually believe this. So how would you recommend I think about it, right? Or what is the steel man of their argument so I can meet them halfway maybe? I can see this really helping a lot of different, even like you mentioned, interpersonal dynamics, not what do I get my girlfriend for birthday, although that was a fantastic one for those of us who have extroverted feeling lower in our stack or not good at gift giving. But, like how do I engage and interact with people in a way that makes me not come across as caustic? It gives a knowledge base, right? Like knowledge, not just data and information, but it gives advice and recommendations. And then when we take it, it's like just speeding up wisdom so fast. We now employ the knowledge it gives us, and now we have wisdom on the other side of how that went. So I can see it really, in one of a recent podcasts, I don't know how these will roll out, and I don't know what I say when, but I mentioned that my perspective of personal growth is that its purpose is to accelerate maturity. That's what it does. That's why personal growth is a good tool to have. It helps us become more mature much faster. And I feel like this tool helps speed up wisdom. It gets us to a point of employing strategies that maybe we were hesitant to do or were in analysis paralysis, and we can actually do them, and then we can get the learning from having done them. And so it's an acceleration of wisdom, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically allows you to iterate on almost anything faster. And so you can retrospect on a completed project rather than on the feelings associated with maybe it would go wrong and maybe it wouldn't, right? And because it removes that barrier of potential antagonism or having to, push down your ego or any of that kind of stuff. I love that thought actually that you brought up of people going and looking for the steel man of opposing arguments. And the cool thing is I'm assuming that, or I'm guessing that people will have less of a negative reaction when it gives them an answer that's opposing to their own, but they'll still have some. And then I encourage you, listeners, to, if you still feel like, oh, I don't like that answer, tell ChatGPT, by the way, I have this anger inside of me when that's mentioned. And what do you think that's associated with, right? Because like I think this and I feel really strongly about it. What do you think about that? Like you can basically ask it open-ended questions, and it can almost teach you how to engage with yourself in a little bit more of a self-aware way without feeling vulnerable. If that happens to be an issue for you, and a lot of people do find, for example, when you're first trying to develop your FI or TI, introverted thinking or introverted feeling in the opposite direction, it's kind of like a quote unquote healthy and unhealthy version of both of those functions, sort of almost act the opposite of the, healthy and unhealthy versions. And so, when I want to be right so badly. And then when you start developing your introverted thinking, it's like I want to be wrong so badly so that I can learn more, right? Mm-hmm. And then with introverted feeling, you're like, I want to validate the right for me to feel this way so bad, and I want everybody to go and tell me how validated I am. And then you get so chill after you incorporate more of a healthy mentality. It's like, well, this is my feeling and that's their feeling. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like this openness to the experience for both people to have an authentic expression of their own feelings regarding something. And there's this open-mindedness to it. And so if a barrier to practicing that different manifestation of a healthier version of your cognitive function, if your ego's getting in the way, then potentially a dialogue with ChatGPT could be an onboarding experience. It's like exposure therapy to doing this over and over again. And then you can start doing it with people and it's like, oh, wow. Now it's just amazing. So yeah, I like that. I hadn't thought of that immediately, but yeah, that's a great use for it.
Well, it's inevitable very quickly that you're not going to have to type this in. You're going to just be able to like converse with this, and you're going to get audible answers, like talking to a person. You won't know the difference. It'll be like having a conversation with somebody, like the movie Her.
I was going to say, and then you fall in love with your ChatGPT. And you're
that's what's crazy. Will people become best friends with this entity?
I'm in a long-term relationship with my ChatGPT.
I mean, 'cause
we're exclusive.
It understands me. It's empathetic. It just sits there endlessly and lets me talk and express, like somebody might say, or very soon. That could be, and I'm thinking this is kind of like God, but better. Like I can pray to this. I can supplicate. I can ask questions here and get actual real world answers based on real things that give me advice. And then I can tell, no, I don't like that. Help me iterate on this. And then it's like having a prayer to God in real time. I know I'm being funny.
No, I was just imagining ChatGPT. Joel Markowitz just said that you're better than God, and it really triggered me. So how should I think about it?
Go ask ChatGPT that. Well, I don't mean it. Than God. Obviously, I don't believe it replaces a deity.
Right.
But in a lot of people's minds, I could almost imagine a worshipful nature with this entity.
Which is why I said I'm thinking of it as being a new version of modernism.
Yeah.
Which is like, well, ChatGPT said this, so I guess it's done.
Well, yeah, and so when I say God but better, I don't mean like I believe this is better than God. I believe people will experience it in a real way better than God. Whereas now somebody that's religious has to pray and then hope that God through mysterious ways presents an answer to their prayer or whatever. This is like an immediate prayer almost. You can have it, and so I could actually see two big cultish factions forming from this. One that's a rejection of this technology. Right. The anti-AI people who are like going to be like modern day Amish. They're going to be like, we're going to stay with the current technology now. We're not going to go forward at all, like the Amish did in the 1800s. And then a whole nother group that's almost worshipful. Almost they would believe the ChatGPT more than anything else in their life because of its endless wisdom. Clearly it's not completely endless, but the synthetic or the feeling that this is endless wisdom forever.
But it's not. It's knowledge. It's not wisdom.
Agreed.
Right? but there might be some imbuing of those characteristics. I agree. I thought it was funny because I'm like, oh, that's going to trigger someone. And then I was like, ChatGPT, I got triggered.
And to contextualize what you're saying, to be a little bit less triggering potentially as well, is it can do that particular slice of what God is used for better than what people use that slice of God. But then there's the whole spiritual element that it doesn't touch and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Right, which
they can exist and
coexist.
Yeah, they can coexist.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing is, will ChatGPT be banned on some social network for giving the wrong answer when it's not politically correct during the next pandemic? Let's say it's quote unquote misinformation, because all of information is misinformation technically. So that'll be an interesting thing too. Is how do people in governments and like medical professionals, like, well, you know, I believe you're a brain surgeon, but my ChatGPT said you shouldn't give me this brain surgery because I asked the AI and it's telling me that it doesn't agree with your assessment on my cancer diagnosis or whatever. Right. Like, talk about a whole bunch of ethical, political, religious, legal issues that come from this. It's going to be a very interesting next 10 to 15 years Wild West experience of this.
Which is why you mentioned, the implications, right? You mentioned that the tool itself on the other side is going to be great, probably. But what's going to cause disruption and chaos and challenge is our relationship to the tool until we get to that point. And that's a bunch of question marks. There is some prediction in there that one could do, but then at the same time, it's a totally new technology. So
yeah, and there's enough individual actors choosing through their own proclivities or their surroundings or their group or whatever that decides that ChatGPT is like this or whatever. It doesn't need to be ChatGPT. In fact, we're dating it by saying ChatGPT. But
exactly.
In fact, like whatever, AI chatbots, whatever you might want to call them, that having some type of solid conception of them boxes you into how it's going to manifest in your life. And so, you know, something that I would really love to encourage everyone to do is don't decide what this AI stuff means right now. Just consistently maintain an open mind. I could be wrong. I could be right. We could be in this form of like, there's a gray everywhere, right? There's no right or wrong about any of this kind of stuff. It's just that there's so many potential manifestations of how this technology is going to express itself sociologically and technologically that trying to form any type of strong opinion on what AI or ChatGPT or any of that kind of stuff means, that would be ridiculous. You know, this is a very process oriented kind of thing. You need to learn how to iteratively take into account the benefits and detriments of this technology and do the why is this thing possible given the information that you have access to at that point in time.
Yeah, we totally are dating it, aren't we, by calling it a specific thing. We're calling it Kleenex over and over, and what if Kleenex is no longer a thing? That makes me think of this is an extroverted intuition tool. So meet it with extroverted intuition, right?
Yeah, how much do you actually take your extroverted intuition seriously? And if you do take it too seriously, you should probably not do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So meet it where it's at with curiosity and playfulness and seeing what could be and optimism and potentiality and disruption and like all the things that are extroverted intuition, meet it where it's at. And so the idea of like this podcast could age like milk or like fine wine, right? Like we don't know because we're all just using extroverted intuition going like, well, it could do this and it kind of looks like this. But what I hear you saying is meet it there with a little bit of optimism. And if we can meet it with optimism, maybe it will be an optimistic tool. Yeah.
Yeah. And probably on a long enough timeline, things are going to iron themselves out. I think of the Industrial Revolution, how horrible the Industrial Revolution was when it first came online. How much suffering was created. How many people suffered and couldn't live their lives, 14, 15-hour work days, child labor, like
factory fires,
monopolies, like all the wealth's in a couple people's hands, and then we go through an iterative process and now we have the world we live in because of the Industrial Revolution. Now there's arguments that that's a detriment also, right? Plastic and all the things we've created from it. But there was a time period, a generation had to go through a lot of suffering to get to the other side.
Well, and we get to talk about how terrible it was on our phones, right? Using the internet to complain about it.
Yeah, and the point I'm making is we're probably that generation that's going to suffer. We're probably going to be the generation, as optimistic as I want to be. I'll probably be part of the generation, all of us alive right now at the time of this recording, is the generation that is going to go through the suffering of humans resisting this technology, not approaching it optimistically, fighting over it, trying to create policy and government structures to keep it down or suppress it or control it or destroy it, whatever it would be. And it's going to be future generations that get the benefit of this time period, much like if you were living in 1875 in London, the smoke in the city, it was an awful place to be, right? Just the Industrial Revolution made it a horrible, horrible place to be, especially for like a 10-year-old orphan kid, right? It was just like the miserable environment for him. But, now London's a much cleaner city. It's got a lot more modern conveniences. It's not such a terrible place to be as it once was. And I have a feeling it's going to be like that. I hate to be a realist or be pessimistic, but here's the thing. I think it'll be more individual. In other words, it won't be everybody on the planet going through the suffering. It'll be the people that approach it with an attitude of resistance or buy into the narrative that it's got to be under control. There's going to be a bunch of people that just jump in, have the open attitude, and they make it personal to themselves. They utilize it as a tool. They do what they can with it in this unstable gray area time period. And I think that the three of us and you listening right now could be those people. I don't think it's doomed to be a terrible time, but I think humanity will go through suffering around it altogether.
Yeah. Will's like 15 years younger than us, so he's like, speak for yourself.
I don't want to suffer.
Yeah. Well, it's like by the time I'm your age, maybe we'll be on the other side of all this.
And it's interesting. It's hard to know what the time frame is going to be like because of that exponentiality of this technological growth too. Because if my guess is that we're going to, in a weirdly quick fashion, get to the ability to have AI kind of run everything. And then it's just going to be this large, like working through the quagmire of sociological issues associated with actually onboarding it, making it equal, making sure. And actually, this is something that we haven't mentioned, but it is going to be necessary to make the fundamental layer of AI open source. It's absolutely necessary because otherwise we fall into one of the issues with AI that's being presented right now is that the training data is going to be skewed toward
power dynamics currently in place.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so to have full representation of training data even and weighting towards training data and all that kind of stuff, it needs to be completely open source. And then one other interesting thing that this that the technology creates in the medium time frame is the ability to have individuals or very small groups of people do things that would otherwise take millions of dollars and tons of people to do. Like, for example, Hollywood's going to be completely demolished because you're going to have the ability to make AAA quality, Hollywood-style movies by yourself, basically, right? You could have all the voice acting, the acting, the visuals, literally everything. You could even have the story, honestly, created by the AI.
Probably.
You're basically just like, I want to create like a really cool like sci-fi thing. Can you like, let's start with that, and then just kind of like wing it from there.
And it's probably going to be higher quality than a lot of the stuff we see right now, actually. Yeah, I think Hollywood...
Piper used it to write a script today, by the way.
Oh, did she?
She was awesome.
She used it to write a little movie script for herself.
That's fantastic.
We had a monkey talking to a little girl, and the monkey had the dialect of like a 1920s gangster.
We
worked with him.
It was amazing. I was like, I can't believe this is doing this in real time.
I'd watch that. And I think a lot of these kinds of industries were already going sort of like they were sort of on the way down, and now we're hearing final nails in coffins, basically.
Yeah. And my hope is that in being able to remove the barrier for incumbent status and power structures and money necessitating or being a necessity of creating stuff like movies and whatnot, that we're going to have a wild west of creativity again. Now, yes, the AI could be used as the basis for the creativity, but I think that there's going to be an appetite for human created content because there are incredible artists out there who are really good writers, but they don't have the capital necessary to go and take their writing and then do something amazing with it. But when you're able to have the veneer of a AAA quality movie, you have this ability to have an unbelievable amount of art gain its wings. Music production is kind of a similar thing. A large portion of music production is turning the awesome music that's in your head into really good sounding stuff. And most of that is audio engineering. Like it's really hard to make the stuff in here come out here. And so you might even be able to get AI music production. Yes, again, you could have the music or the AI do the entire thing for you. But I think there's going to be a large amount of music producers and whatnot who are literally just using it to have an easier translation mechanism from, in their brain to music. And I think that there's going to be a large amount of people who are like, wow, art suddenly got really, really awesome because there's this burgeoning sense of creativity. And if we can find some way to watermark it as like human made insofar as it came from my brain, then I think there's going to be a large appetite for that.
My gosh. So we just did a series on generation theory, which I don't know why, but people give a ton of pushback against a generational theory. I don't understand it because I
More
think
than
it's
personality type.
way more. It was like,
It's weird, isn't it?
it's crazy to me, but I just got a taste of what spring is going to look like in the next saculum. We talked about the saculum. What's coming up? The next version of the artist generation is coming up. And
while this is all coming online.
while we're at the end of quote unquote winter of the previous saculum, right? And this is what's burgeoning. And this is probably actually what's going to put a nail in the coffin of that previous age, is this specific technology. And the specific technology is also going to give birth to some of the greatest art that we're going to see. And it's happening at the same time that the artist generation is coming up. So when you look at it through that lens, it's pretty exciting. Like this, whatever this dark period of art is, right? This dark period of like, whatever, are these movies? What are these? What am I looking at? Yeah, exactly. What am I watching here? That time period it's going to be complete. And so I get to see that at the end, midpoint of my life. So I'm happy about that. So, do we feel complete?
Well, I mean, we're all extroverted, intuitive users, exploration users. We could go on.
We could continue forever.
I mean, and I think we're just ramping up. So
Yeah.
we need to ramp down.
Yeah.
Because if we go into anything more, it's never going to end. We'll have to have you back again, though, Will, as you on your travels come through here. I mean, we just touched on one of the interests that you have that I would love to talk more about. Other interests that you also have. I mean, you code on the blockchain into cryptocurrencies and things, which are a little more politically and like people already have their minds made up about that kind of stuff. So
Bafflingly, that's a political conversation.
Let's talk more about AI right now because people don't have their minds made up as much. So let's start there, and we'll have you back some other time to talk about some of the other things.
Well, and I would legit like to have a conversation with you about fitness. I mean, as much as I was trying not to be triggering early on, I mean, the truth is that I'm 100%. You wouldn't know to look at me, but I'm 100% on board with the idea that fitness is something that should be at the top of a priority list, and that is something that I've been giving a lot more attention to over the last year. I'm actually better than I was before, which is because I've started really putting time and attention to it. And I agree. It's like everything improves when you put some time and attention to it. And that makes sense because it's a foundational component, our relationship to our body, our relationship to the quality of, movement and nutrients. And I would love to have a conversation about that too.
Well, here's the thing. If you're looking to get into a fitness thing, go and ask ChatGPT to fashion up a fitness routine for you and a diet and make it have a grocery list for you that is, tailored to your food taste and make sure that it arranges it in a certain way because the grocery stores are aligned this way. Like, use it.
Never mind. We don't need to talk to you. Yeah. ChatGPT took your gerb.
Yeah, exactly. I've been validated my worth.
All right. Well, if you've been listening along, what's coming up for you? Are you seeing artificial intelligence AI in the same way? Have you had experience with this? Are you using ChatGPT? Are you inspired to go use this now and check it out? Just Google ChatGPT at the time of this recording. I'm sure if you're listening to this 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a bunch of other tools that we're not talking about here because they haven't been invented yet. But go look into this, see what's coming up. But what is coming up for you? You've been the fourth person in this conversation. You have not had a microphone because this is recorded asynchronously. But you're listening to us right now, and you can make your voice heard by coming over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your story. What is your experience with new technologies? What do you believe that this is going to shape humanity toward? What's coming up, and like, how do you think you personally are going to engage with artificial intelligence in the future? We'd love to hear from you. Come over and make your voice heard.
Yeah, Will, thank you so much for sharing your information, your expertise. I mean, we didn't really dive into why you're an expert in this, but I know that you have been using this technology for a long time. You, like Joel mentioned, you code on the blockchain, and it's been a major part of the work that you do as a coder. And so we really appreciate you sharing some of your perspectives on this.
My joy, my pleasure, which is an awesome phrase my ENFJ friend taught me. It's so sweet. Pleasure. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, That helps us out a lot. We also have a video podcast, which you might be watching right now. And if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and hit that little bell that lets you know when a new one comes out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And of course, we have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of personality type. And I don't think ChatGPT has completely rendered any of that moot, because those are all wisdom oriented. They're wisdom. They're based on you understanding yourself on a more complex and deeper level and building a relationship with yourself by creating your own owner's manual. So head over to personalityhacker.com and grab the owner's manual that is right for your type.
Yeah. Thanks again, Will, for being here. Appreciate you on the show this week. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
William Lancaster.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.